I'm going to show you an absolutely fascinating game, the top board struggle in the FIDE Chess.com Grand Swiss tournament held in Riga. Now, if you remember, going into round 10, the penultimate round, 3 players shared the lead. There was Alireza Firouzja, David Howell and Fabiano Caruana. Now, Caruana had a tough game. He had black against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. The top board game was Alireza Firouzja against David Howell. That's the one we're going to look at. So a decisive result here would really give one of the players a big advantage going into the final round. Remember, the top 2 players in this tournament will qualify for the candidates tournament next spring, so that is a huge incentive, a huge prize. Now, David Howell, he was on a roll going into this game. He'd won 4 games on the trot. Firouzja had just lost to Caruana. Do check out that game. It was my previous video. Fascinating game. So what's happening here? Well, Firouzja playing the gioco piano, and well, there are so many ways to play this for both sides, but what the line they follow has actually been pretty popular at the highest levels. So you'll notice that David stopped bishop g5, which can lead to really wild positions. And he played a5, just preventing expansion here. Bishop e6 and bishop b5, avoiding an exchange. And this position has been very popular. And you might recall on this channel I've looked at games where black has played queen b8, a very trendy move, looking to put the queen on a7. But David went in a different direction. I mean, both players up to this point playing fairly quickly, but now they started to slow down a bit. Bishop a7. I suspect that both players had analysed this position on their own, but still they were kind of feeling their way through. I think, you know, these are non-forcing variations. So it's the kind of position where you have to really feel what's going on. So they weren't just banging out these moves. They were both spending some time, and both players actually, they are prone to fall into time pressure. So both knights swing over to the king side. This position has actually been seen before. That's why I'm absolutely sure that both players knew what they were doing. b5, pushing the bishop back, and a4. So David gained some space on the queen side. And now Alireza pushes through in the middle, and this knight comes to g6. So we have this strange kind of standoff on the king side. Very solid, and well, it's clear that white is slightly better just because white has just a little bit more control in the centre compared to black. However, black is so solidly placed. You know, all these minor pieces are active, well placed, and the fact that black has gained space on the queen side is quite pleasant. You know, this bishop is a very strong piece. But still, it's a little advantage to white because white has more control in the centre. Bishop e3 looks very sensible to oppose the bishop on a7. Rook e8. Yeah, well, there is tension on the e-file. You never know when the position might break open and black could get some pressure here. So rook e8 looks pretty normal. Bishop d3. Well, that bishop starts to look at this pawn, so it sort of discourages c5. And who knows, might make room for the queen here. Bishop e6, this bishop improves as well. a3, well, that means that the rook will be able to move. The pawn won't be en prise to the bishop. And now, well, both sides start to invest a lot of time around here. David thought for almost 20 minutes on queen c7, just connecting the rooks. You know, he likes to get everything right. And Here, I mean, you know, one of my first thoughts with white would be to look at the king side and maybe threaten some kind of sacrifice here, but it's not really working. Not with, well, black has very good communication basically, and pieces around the king, so it's just not working. But instead, Alireza went for rook c1, opposite the queen. Always looks very sensible. Bishop a5, an interesting move. So that means that perhaps it's possible to take here, and white can't recapture because of the pin. So therefore, rook e2. And that could be useful to protect this b pawn. Queen b7 gets away from the rook. And c4. So now things start to break open in the middle. So there's real tension here. No pieces exchanged so far. So you can see that rook on e2 has actually done a pretty good job on that square, because it means that b2 is protected if the b file is open. And black has a choice here. You know, maybe this is possible. But David played b takes c4 again after 20 minutes thought. That's a big chunk of time. Bishop takes. Now black doesn't want to exchange again because that will bring the rook up, and then rook takes pawn is possible. But David played excellently here. d5. So, I mean, what a tense situation in the middle. You know, where should white capture? You know, should you be taking here? Should you be taking here? Should you not take at all? Well, if pawn takes here, then knight takes e4 is actually fine for black. E takes here. Here takes again. This should be okay for black. A little pawn sacrifice, but now black has the two bishops. Rook d8, you know, that's a little bit awkward for the queen. Basically black is fine here, good compensation. You see that pawn does a nice job of just cramping those two. Well, it's really complicated. Firouzja went for bishop d3. Again, crazy position. There's a very interesting pawn sacrifice here. My computer wants to sacrifice this pawn. Very generous. And if pawn takes, simply d4, getting a nice protected pass pawn here. Well, I mean, there is definitely some compensation there, but David went for something a little bit simpler. He cleared the center with e takes. And here black is absolutely fine. Well, the best move is to play bishop c7, just hitting that knight. Now, I can sort of understand why David was maybe reluctant to play this. You know, this is on. It's possible to take here, but the thing is, black also threatens to take something. Take here and capture on e4. After this, e takes. Yes, white has the two bishops, but actually this is very annoying for black. This knight is splendidly placed. This bishop, well, all black's minor pieces are actually really nicely placed. So it's actually not so clear at all. Anyway, very complex situation. Knight takes. David instead just ducked the bishop back to d7, protecting that pawn. Well, it's an understandable move, but now Firouzja takes the initiative. That knight looking really menacing, looking at the king side, but also looking at that square on d6. Knight d6, forking queen and rook threatened. So bishop c7 covers this square, but now things start to turn in white's favour. If knight takes, that's a little bit different. Now the bishop and knight strike down on g7. And that's quite uncomfortable. The queen is a long way from the king side. So pawn takes was met by c takes d5 and bishop d4 anyway. So obviously threatening some nasty stuff here. This is very uncomfortable now. Bishop e5, and now the tactics fly. Well, I mean, rook takes is a very interesting move with a similar idea, but basically knight takes pawn check is a good move, definitely. Because after this, bishop takes g6, and if that's captured here, then white takes on e5. White has won a pawn and really wrecked black's king position. And let me see. Well, I mean, various things that black can try, but bishop takes g3 was a good try actually from David. So Alireza exchanged. And here, well, you could just take like this. But, I mean, it depends if white can get some attack against the king. I mean, the danger here is that black can, try to exchange queens, and then it's not so clear. So in this position, remember, white is a piece down. So it's really tactical. Queen f3. By this stage, David Howell was actually really short on time. And he made his next move, which is a brilliant try. He made his next move with just 4 seconds to spare. They did get 30 seconds increment after each move, but still, he was in time pressure. He played queen c6, and that is a shocker. Now, Firouzja had more time, but it was clear that this one took him by surprise. Very tricky. So if rook takes queen, rook e1 mate, well, that much we can see. Okay, what else? Queen takes bishop. Queen takes rook check. So, I mean, this could still be very dangerous for black, but there's a very clear winning move. Knight g4 check. Just blocking the g file and then take the bishop. And black is a rook up. So you can see how this is a pretty shocking move. Okay, what about if white simply moves the rook away? Well, now black moves the bishop back, and black is a piece up. Should be winning. So how does white get out of this? Well, there is a move, and after calming himself down, Alireza found the move. Bishop c2. Great move. I mean, he was lucky that he had sufficient time in the bank, sufficient time to invest on that tricky decision. Lucky is the wrong word. He made sure he was ahead on time, basically. He spent 11 minutes over that move. Excellent move. And now, I mean, David, very, very short of time, put his bishop back on b8. I mean, it's kind of a very understandable move. I mean, maybe he could have put up more resistance with this move. This does give up the queen. See, there's a discovered attack on the queen. So that's check. Knight takes, rook takes. So it's queen against rook and 2 minor pieces. But I think the problem is that actually white's attack persists. There are a lot of loose units here for white to attack. It's better for white, but it's not crystal clear. Okay, let's go back. But in the game, that was definitely a mistake, because Firouzja could now simplify, and he has an extra pawn, and it's a relatively calm position. The problem is that black is not only a pawn down, but in fact, these pawns are split, and ultimately, that is going to tell. Rook c8. So David's pinned. He's doing his best here. Bishop c3. Nice and solid. That's beautiful. d4. That's an attempt to stir things up, but just bishop d2. So that now the bishop protects the rook. King here. That protects the h-pawn. Bishop d3, okay, nice and simple. Just exchanging rooks, so that just takes the sting out of the position. h5. Okay, that pawn is fixed. I mean, this is very, very unpleasant now. I mean, maybe it was better to keep the pawn there, where it can be protected by the king, but ultimately, I'm pretty sure that white should win this one. but this is now out on a limb. h4 is an excellent move, just fixing that pawn. And now a very nice little king shuffle. King comes over. King c2. So it might be possible at some moment to move this bishop and then bring a king in to d3 to attack this pawn. It might be that white simply wants to create a passed pawn with b3. In any case, bringing the king to c2, I think, emphasizes the difference between the two positions, because you can see this king way out of play and sort of has to hang around protecting, making sure this pawn is protected. So excellent maneuver from Alireza. And after this, bishop e6, bishop b5, hits the pawn, check. It looks quite nice, but actually once the king comes here attacking the d pawn, it really is all over. And some very nice technique. Bishop d7, just slowly unraveling. So this bishop is looking to just travel around to attack this pawn. Good move. So fixing that pawn for the time being. Of course, if bishops are exchanged, then king takes pawn after. Bishop d6. So looking to play c5. Bishop e8. Oh, that is uncomfortable. King h6. Bishop c5. So now that pawn is disappearing. f4, that's a bit of a randomizer, but of course that can be ignored. Bishop d8, so now white is 2 pawns up, and not only that, but those remaining pawns are weak. The king is terribly placed. But nice bit of technique, king d2, so that forces this bishop to choose a diagonal. It really has to protect both pawns. So the bishop on e8 is attacking the pawn on a4, so bishop b3 holds that pawn. But now white goes to attack black's king. Check, and king's d1, that means there's no more checks. And here actually David Howell resigned. Why? Because, well, what happens is this. Bishop f4 check. The king has to go back and bishop takes h5. And there's even bishop d1 coming. So basically white is 3 pawns up here. It's completely winning for white. So I'm disappointed for David Howell. He's one of the good guys, and up to this point having an excellent tournament, but he missed his way at the critical moment, and Alireza Firouzja thoroughly deserved that victory. He bounces back into the lead. Let's take a look at the standings and the pairings going into the final round. So Alireza Firouzja on 7.5 points. 2 players on 7 points. Fabiano Caruana, he drew with Vasilukov today. And Grigory Oparin from Russia, 24-year-old. I know he's highly regarded in Russian chess circles. So, very interesting. Last round pairings. Oparin with white against Firouzja. So Firouzja basically just needs a draw. But if Oparin beats him, then Oparin could seal a place in the candidates. Caruana has white against Alexander Predka from Russia, also a young Russian, not, doesn't, rated way below Caruana. So, but, you know, the younger generation, one never knows, and having a good tournament. But if Caruana wins, then, you know, he will have a good chance of going through. So it's going to be a fascinating last round. You know, how hard does Oparin push it against Firouzja? I think he probably has to go for a win, considering the tiebreak situation. But this could be Alireza Firouzja's moment. He just needs a draw to get through. And secure a place in the candidates. It's going to be fascinating. I'll be reporting on that final round. Stay tuned to the tournament, and I'll report back. Thanks for watching.